My name is Leil McDonald, I'm Director of Jewish Life here at the Levite Jewish Community Center. I want to first thank you so much for joining us today for Southern Jewish Voices. It's an initiative where we partner with Temple Beth-Or on bringing inspiring stories of Jewish initiative people from our community here. We want to thank the Ted and Mercury Fund at the Levite Jewish Community Center and the Alabama Humanitarian for sponsoring this program. And we're very excited about this one. It's going to be incredible.
Okay, everyone bear with me on this microphone a little bit because we haven't had this exact setup before. So, give us a little grace on any tech stuff. But great to see everybody here today. Thank you for coming. I'm really excited to have Miriam Friedman here. I have known of you for a long time, but have really enjoyed getting to know you as we prepared for the conversation today. And I think this is going to be a really interesting interview with somebody who's a pivotal, leader in our Jewish community. So appreciate everybody coming to listen in your time. So we will jump in, and we're going to start by talking a little bit about your early life. So you shared with me that you grew up in Boston and then moved to New York, where you met your husband, who of course we also know all very well, Rabbi Yossi Friedman, before coming to Birmingham. So just tell us a little bit to start about your growing up, your family and parents, and particularly we're always interested in learning about your Jewish context.
Sure. So I grew up in, am I facing you? I guess I'm facing everybody else.
I grew up. He can't hear.
I grew up in Boston. I was born in New Jersey, and then we moved to Muncie, New York, but I primarily grew up in Boston. We moved there when I was 7 years old. And my father, of blessed memory, was a physicist, in particular a solar physicist. And so my father worked for Mobile Solar, which was based out of Boston for many years. And so I grew up in a Chabad family, but a little bit of a different family than your typical Chabad family, because my father did not grow up in a religious family at all. My father was a Sephardic Jew, and so I had my mother's side, which were a typical Ashkenazic European family, and my father was a Sephardi, and his family and his sisters and my cousins were all, none of them were Orthodox Jews. And so we had this beautiful relationship with my father's family along with my mother's family, but it really gave us the beauty of relationships with everybody. And so I grew up in Boston. I'm one of 5. I have 2 brothers, I have 2 sisters. I have a brother and sister who live in California and a brother and sister who live in New York. And I think I was telling Margaret that if you would have asked my parents which of their children was going to live next door to them, it was going to be me. But God obviously had other plans, and Yossi and I obviously moved here, but I was a real homebody as a kid, and ended up in Birmingham, Alabama.
I'm going to ask you more about that next, but I am curious to kind of pull out something that you just said a little bit more, which is, that you did have this family that was a little bit of a different sort of habad family. And how do you think that those relationships have sort of, helped your work now? Because it strikes me there might be a connection there.
Right. So I'll tell you that as a kid, we used to go visit my grandparents all the time in New Jersey, particular Thanksgiving. That was a big time when we drove to my grandparents. And my grandparents did not keep kosher at home, but they would have like a section in their dining room at the bottom of their china cabinet that was for our family when we would come. And when my family would arrive, my grandmother would open up that cabinet and she had paper goods there and a special knife and a toaster oven, and we would eat from what my grandparents had. Obviously that was kosher. And it was just a way of life for us. It wasn't, my grandparents were such incredibly loving people. And I think it really gave me an appreciation for the relationships of people that are not always exactly like you are, and it also gave me an appreciation for my grandparents. It was not so easy for them that my father became an Orthodox Jew, particularly a Chabad Jew. And I think a number of you know that my dad went to college, and it was a big deal for my grandparents. And then when he was in college is when he met some young Chabad rabbis, and he ended up going to study in yeshiva for a year. And it was very difficult for my grandparents that my father left college for that year. My father really wanted to actually stay and become a Hillel rabbi. And at the time, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Chabad leader at the time, told my father that he should go back to college and he should finish his PhD because he would do more for the Jewish community with those 3 letters after his name. And that's what my father did. And so my grandfather, actually, when Yossi and I got engaged, my grandfather told Yossi that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was an incredibly smart man because he always felt so grateful that he sent my father back to college because it was so important for my grandparents that my father had that education. So it was really, I think it prepared me because even till today, I have beautiful relationships with my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, and even though our lives look a little different, there was always a tremendous amount of respect and no judgment. And I know it was not easy for my grandparents, and I never felt any sort of judgment from them. Now I was a child, but all I felt was a tremendous amount of love, and it really taught me an important lesson of being able to love your children and grandchildren even when they do something maybe that's not in your comfort zone.
That's great, and I can definitely see how all of that informs your work today, which we'll get more into. But tell us too about what it was like to come to Birmingham. You just pointed out that you were a homebody, close to your family. How did you all make your way here, and what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, so Yossi and I, probably a lot of you know that Yossi used to come here. Yossi is a nephew of Fermi Posner, and so Yossi would come here before we even knew each other. And when we got engaged, Yossi came here shortly after, and at the time, Joanne, his Morrison, said to Yossi Posner, what would it take for Yossi and his new soon-to-be bride to move down here? And Yossi was like, give them a little bit of time. But that is actually how we ended up down here in Birmingham, Alabama. But for me to move here was not easy. I was 21 years old. I was telling you this. I was very, very young. With a 3-month-old baby. Label came with us, and he was our oldest son. And it was tough. It was really, we lived on Montclair Road across the street, and Yossi and I both taught at the day school. I know that's probably another question you're going to ask, but it was I was very young. I really, like my family came a lot in the beginning to support me. I would go back home to Boston a lot. And I really grew up here. I really grew up as an adult in the Birmingham community, which I think is one of the best gifts that I've had.
And I want to ask you more too about, what that transition was like, especially, because there isn't such a large Orthodox community here. But I think this is maybe a good moment to zoom out as well, because, we are going to have many non-Jewish listeners who are watching this recording later. And I feel like I learned a lot when you were talking to me a little bit about the history of Habad and Hasidic Judaism as a philosophy. So maybe kind of give us some context for those who might not be in the know already.
Yeah, so, remind me your original question, because my brain went someplace else.
A little bit of history of Habad and
okay.
Hasidic Judaism, and just give us a little context for people who might not be familiar.
So Chabad is really a philosophy and a way to approach and live your life as a Jewish person. And really, so much of the foundation of it is coming from a place of joy in our relationship with God. And so much of our life and the way we see Judaism and our relationship with God is through a positive lens and bringing light and positivity to this world. And so when Yossi and I moved here, we really moved here with the goal and the purpose to teach in Birmingham. And actually we both taught literally as teachers when we first moved here. But that's really on a daily basis, that's our mission. That is what we do. And so Chabad, I really feel like gives a deep foundation for seeing every single person for who they are. There's no judgment, and I think that's like a misconception that a lot of people tend to have because the Chabad community is an Orthodox community. Often people will say to me, well, I'm not like you, or I don't do everything you do. And I always say, there's no expectation. This is a choice that Yossi and I have chosen for our life and for our family and the way we live our life. But my choice, I don't impose it on anybody else, and I'm just here to teach. And I would love, if you have questions, I always say to people, I would love for you to ask me them, and I want to answer them for you. So moving to Birmingham has really given me an opportunity, and Yossi and I together, and our family, to be able to live in a community where we have that opportunity to teach on a daily basis. And we teach really through a way of life. And that's really been a way that we've raised our children, is that you teach by example, the way you interact with people, what you do, how you serve God, how you speak, everything that you do. And so that continues to be a foundation for what I do.
That's great. And I'm going to ask you about day school next, because I know we have some of our day school students here. But just to sort of finish this question, because we've been exploring different denominations this season, maybe just sort of draw the dots there between, like, so is Chabad and Orthodox Judaism, and how does that relate to some of the other denominations? We've talked to folks from Emmanuel, which is, Reform, and Bethel, which is conservative. So maybe you can sort of close the circle for us there.
So, it's funny, because I think denomination has a negative, to me, I don't love the word denomination, because I think to myself, who decides? As Jewish people, or as a Jewish person, every one of us is on our own Jewish journey, and our goal should always be, no matter where you are, is to move forward, is to continue to build that relationship with God deeper, no matter where you are. But that being said, and often when I'll give people a tour of preschool, I always say that there's no denomination in preschool, and I really believe that in life, denomination, we should just practice being a Jew, no matter what synagogue or temple you choose to belong to. That being said, Orthodoxy really takes, the commandments in the Torah at face value, that the Torah was written however many years ago, and it still applies till today. And so it's really a structure for life. And a beautiful structure for life, and it really gives us like a manual for how to live our life, how to raise your family, how to educate your children, how to eat properly, how to build that relationship with God, how to structure your home. There's so much beauty written in the Torah, and so Orthodoxy says to you that the Torah, here is your manual for living your life, and it really takes it at face value. So I think as far as denominations goes, I think some of the other denominations, the truth is I can't speak for what the other denominations feel, but I think is that it's not as black and white. Our life there is a lot of black and white. It's we do and we don't. There isn't that much gray. And I'll never forget, I once had a really good friend who does not live here anymore, but she had once said to me, she says, Miriam, I really envy you in a way because you don't have gray in your life. You do and you don't do. And I said, it's true, we do and we don't do. But it's actually, it's a way of life that I think is a very healthy way of life, because like anything else in a lot of situations, some things we do and some things we don't. And so that's how I'd answer that.
That's a great answer, and I have to say I really like your pushing back on sort of the denominational lines too, because it's funny, it's a little side tangent, but we give tours at Temple Bethel all the time, and so we're always having to explain what conservative Judaism is, and so I always feel like I'm having to sort of explain what it is, and then saying, but every single person in this congregation would tell you something differently about their own relationship with Judaism. So I appreciate you both defining and then also pointing out that those definitions are, sometimes not so strict.
Right.
So that's great. And I want to get into next some of the initiatives that you've worked on in your time here, of which there are many. So let's start with the day school, since you've mentioned it a few times and we have some of our students here listening.
So when Yossi and I first moved to Birmingham, we both came as teachers at the day school. We were hired by Lynn Raviv. So Yossi worked part-time at Chabad and part-time at the day school, and I worked at the day school primarily. And I taught kindergarten, first and second grade at the day school I was sharing with you, and I would move classes based on when our son Label got to the day school. It was decided it was best that I was not Label's teacher. And I'm assuming that the students who are sitting here from the day school probably do not know that there was a time when I taught kindergarten. I used to teach the kids Aleph Beis, the letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and I would dress up as, I called myself Safta Simcha. I'm not even sure Yaakov knows this. I would call myself Safta Simcha, which was like this happy grandmother, and I dressed up as this older Jewish woman, and I would have this big bag, and I would go out of the classroom and knock on the classroom door, and I would come in and visit the class with my big bag with Safta Simcha, and then I would pull out, let's say, the letter Aleph, and I would teach them the letter Aleph, and it went on an adventure and a journey, and eventually, at the time, WBRC was doing like this series on educators in the community, and somebody must have known somebody at WBRC because they came, and they did a whole piece on me as Safta Simcha. I have the video somewhere. But those were my times at the day school, and I love teaching at the day school. I love to teach. I think, I taught before Yossi and I even got married. And so I loved teaching at the day school and then taught there for a number of years until we built our Chabad house and then ended up moving to Chabad to do programming there.
I will say we are going to need to have a copy of that video for a follow-up
Absolutely.
email for everyone.
Yes.
I'm sure everyone's eager to see that. So tell me about the preschool. And you shared with me that this came, the genesis of this was a mommy and me class that people really felt connected to. So maybe tell us a little bit about that class and how it evolved and what that spark was that got people excited.
So after our Chabad house was built in 1998, so that following year, that was the last year I taught at the day school, and at the time we wanted to start some Jewish children's programming there, so I retired from the day school at that point, and I did just kids programs for that first year. And part of doing those kids programs was I did a mommy and me, and I had a group of great mommies, like 14 different mommies, and a lot of them were still good friends of mine that year. And then as the year kind of came to an end, a number of the mommies kept saying, oh, I wish we could continue this. And so I one day casually mentioned it to Joanne, Hess Morrison, and she was like, she came back to me a few days later and she said, Miriam, would you be willing to start a preschool? And if you're willing, I will back you, I will start you, I will fund it. And that's how our preschool began. And so I always joke that our preschool started out, we had 3 full-time students. We had 2 Friedmans and 1 Posner. Those were our 3 full-time students. And then we had a number of other, these mommy and me mommies who were not quite ready to jump into a new school that had just started, but they were willing to come 1 day a week. So we had about 14 kids on a Friday. All the kids came on Fridays, and we had this amazing Friday program that we had. And then over the course of the year, all of those kids actually ended up joining our school full time. And that's kind of how we began.
Tell me about like what makes the Chabad preschool special. I mean, I've heard so many wonderful things from different people. I haven't experienced it myself, but I wonder if you could just sort of tell our listeners, like from your point of view, what's unique or special about the preschool.
So I would really, what I would say is that our preschool is a Jewish. At our essence, my goal is to educate our children, our preschool age children, Jewishly. That is our mission. It defines everything we do. And I always tell parents we are not a business. We are not in the business of preschool, and I think that's a big piece of it. So our bottom line is not the business aspect, it's really why we are there. And because our preschool is in a Chabad house, our whole Chabad house is mission driven. We are here to serve the Jewish community, and so Jewish preschool education is a piece of it. And I think, our preschool is small. At the maximum, we have 60-something kids. That's really what we can hold. And so because we are small, it's a preschool family. Our teachers know all of our children in all of our classrooms. Our children know all of our teachers. There's just a sense of family when you come in, and we talk a lot about a school family. And so the connection is there. And for me as a director, I connect with all of our parents. That's really what I do and why I do it, and it's my driving force. So when I see our parents, besides the, I'll have parents say, Miriam, I need some advice or I need some help on this going on with my child or whatever it is, but it's really just, how are you? What's going on? Anything we can do? You look like you're really tired. Can we help you with something? Your child wasn't here today. What's going on in their world? And I think the smallness of our school gives us that unique ability to connect with those parents. But really at the essence, I would say it's because we are driven by our mission to just educate our children Jewishly, and that's what makes us so special. And I have an amazing staff who make that so special. Really, just as a director, I have the gift of being able to witness it every day, but the teachers that are in our school are really what make it.
It sounds like an amazing community, and I have sort of an off-script question here that I'm going to try to figure out how to phrase, but it sort of strikes me that, with the day school, the mommy and me class, the preschool, you are also sort of creating community that related to a stage of life that you were in too, having your children in the preschool and the day school and in the mommy and me class. To what extent have those things, or when you were starting them, how did they help you, if they did, also feel like you were sort of getting plugged in Birmingham, since you told us that was a difficult transition in some ways. Does that question make sense?
That's a really good question. I think, you know, our younger kids really grew up in the day school because that's for the first 7 years we were here. We had a lot of younger children, and then our daughter Chaya, who's our third, I think she was the last child I was in the day school with. But in preschool, being able to be in preschool with my kids every day was amazing. And in fact, this morning, we did a matzah bakery in preschool, and our son Benny, who is 16 and a half, came to help me, and we were in our pre-K class, and he's helping me, and I'm introducing Benny to all our pre-K kids, and Miss Amy, who teaches our pre-K, says to her kids, you know that Benny was a pre-K student here many years ago. And it was really the best gift for me as a mom to be able to be with my kids in those preschool years. I would go visit them in their classrooms, and just as the director, being there all the time, I would get to just sit down when they were doing circle time and join them, or story time, and it was an amazing gift for me. So it's different for me as a mom, as a preschool director now, not having that age children. But you know, I come with I think as a director, I come with the gift of experience of raising a large family, and that's, I think, a gift that I bring to our school on a daily basis.
That's really cool, and also a perfect transition to tell us more about yourself as a mother. Tell us about, you know, your children and that part of your life.
Right. So I think all of you know, Yossi and I have been blessed with 10 children, Kanai Nahara. And I would say for sure that is my most important job, is raising our children. Raising them in Birmingham, Alabama has been a gift for them. I was sharing this with you that, you know, when our kids were younger, and our youngest son is there, Yaakov, I told him I would not embarrass him. But
just once.
Just once. But raising our kids in Birmingham was an incredible gift for them, because they were raised in a community where not everybody was like them. And it really gave them the perspective and the experience that you can be friends with lots of people, and you can share what you have in common, not what is different. And I feel like that is so important, especially in the world that we live in. And our children have gone on to many different paths. And our kids have all gone to the day school, and I tell people all the time that the day school was an incredible foundation for our children for the first until 8th grade, until they went on to high school. And so our kids have had the gift of living in Birmingham, and I would probably say most importantly, or it's equally important, they have the Birmingham community is our children's family, and what an amazing gift that has been. We have such a loving community that have really become a part of our children's lives on a daily basis, and even today, and continuously stay in touch with our children, and it's really an amazing gift. And our children come back to visit and bring a lot of their friends, and Birmingham's become like a destination for our children's friends, which is amazing.
And you have grandchildren too, I just learned that.
We do, we have 5 beautiful grandchildren, Kanai Nahara, yes.
That's amazing. And I guess I'm curious, you know, you've sort of talked about it a bit, but how your parenting impacts your work, because it definitely seems like the two are intertwined. And I don't know why I'm thinking of this right now, but I will say when my son was born, and you know, they give you the bag with all the things from the different parts of the Jewish community, I think that one of Chabad's contributions was that awesome magnet about conscious parenting. I'm like staring at that on my fridge all the time now that my son's kind of hitting
So funny, I forgot
almost
about that.
toddler age.
Yes.
So I'm curious,
Yeah.
you know, if that's sort of part of your parenting. And
So I would really
philosophy.
say that myself as a parent really evolved over the last 31 years. You know, I'm truly grateful that I was raised by an incredible mother and father, and my husband Yossi was raised by an amazing mother and father. So together, the two of us have had the ability to raise our family with great examples to follow. As a mother, I have really grown. I've told this story many times. I probably shouldn't say it on video, but you know, I tell the story of our third child, how I was once driving home with her. She had finished at the day school, and she was like this perfect kindergartner, and would come into the car and was so challenging. And I remember one day leaving, and I remember saying, Chaya, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to pull over on the side of the road, and I'm going to take you out of the car. What a terrible thing to say to a kindergartner. But I tell that to parents all the time because at the time I didn't know better. I didn't know how to do better. The beauty of having a large family is I learned, and I really, and I'm also a learner by nature, and so I really wanted to learn how to be a better mother and continue to be a better mother, and I feel like it's a journey that we continue on all the time. And so, yeah.
Do you have like one great piece of parenting advice for our audience?
One great piece of parenting advice.
Not to put you on the spot, but
Yeah,
I'm curious
I would
now.
say that in parenting, a great piece of advice is that when everything's falling apart, to remind yourself that this moment is as it is, and it will pass, because it will always pass, and you will move on to the next. And, you know, I think really also that, I know they say to people of young children, enjoy the years because it'll go by so fast. It really does go by so fast, and there's such a beauty in the different stages in life, and just being able to be present in each moment, that's my best piece of advice. I mean, there's a lot of them, and I always, you know, that's what I love about preschool, is that I get to talk to parents all the time, because now that I'm on the other side of raising a lot of small children, I'm like, I can enjoy this stage because it changes and it shifts, and it's not better or worse, but it does change, and there's a beauty in each stage, so.
That's great. I'm gonna ignore my desire to ask you more parenting questions and move us along.
You can meet for coffee.
But you know, we haven't talked about your other various professions and interests that you've pursued, and I was really impressed when we met that you also have a degree in interior design and recently became a certified therapist. So I would love to hear more, you know, about those interests and, you know, where you are with them now, and
Right.
just tell us a little bit more about those parts of your life.
Yeah, so I was sharing with you that I was always a very creative person, and it was really my mother who had pushed all of her daughters to go back to school, and so I decided to go back to school, and I thought I wanted to be an interior designer while I was still teaching at the day school. Actually, no, I think I had left the day school. Maybe I had started at that point, but at that time I was running the preschool in Chabad by the time I finished. And I had just began running the preschool because I finished and I got my degree in interior design, and then full-fledged went into running a preschool. I think going back to, I've always been a lifetime learner, and I really think my father, I have a piece of my father in me that way. My father was always a lifetime learner. And my father started his own solar energy company at the age of 63 when most people would have retired. He just was one of these people where life, you know, age didn't matter. It was always like, what was the next opportunity? And so I really think I have a piece of that in me. And so I've always enjoyed learning or trying to do that. And it came into play also as a parent. Like I really, in being a director, I wanted to know what we could do better. What's the cutting edge research for preschool education and how to reach children and understand it. And as a mother, it really correlated with me wanting to be a better mother. That pushed me to learn how to do that better. So that, I would say really that set me on the journey. It was probably about 10 years ago when I really started to learn more about behaviors and understanding in children and what the motivation of that was. And really the drive was from my own self to be able to help some of my children that I felt like needed it, which made me a better preschool educator also. But in that process, it's been very interesting for me to understand the human psyche and just people and how to relate to people. And so about 2.5 years ago, I decided to go back and get my master's and become a therapist, which has, I've loved the learning, hated the school, but not have started if I realized how much work it would have been, but grateful that I had amazing support from Yossi, really, and from my children while I went through that process. But it's really just given me the ability to just be able to be there for our community, and I'm so grateful for that. We live in a hard world, and I would really say that it was COVID that really pushed me. I saw the challenges that our preschool families were facing and how impactful it was for them during COVID, and the fear and the anxiety that everybody had. And I was like, there's got to be a better way, and we need to be able to help our community. And so that was really the driver for me to go back and do that.
That's really interesting, and it's making me wonder too, how those skills are coming into play for you after October 7th. That's not something we talked about when we met before, but how has that impacted your work?
So it's just, now as a therapist, it just gives me a better understanding of of what anxiety looks like, how it plays in our life, how, what to do with fear, how to sit with things that are uncomfortable. And I think I intuitively knew it for a long time, but I've gotten to know it better. Mm-hmm. It's been a real gift for me to be able to share it with the community that we are in, from our preschool families to, everybody that I get to interact with.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and what good timing to have had that training and be able to show up and support the community in that way. And I have just a few more questions, and one will kind of get us back to that as well. But I do want to talk about, because I really enjoyed our conversation about what you feel like some of the misconceptions people have about Habad and Hasidic Judaism and Orthodox Judaism are. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, like what some of those misconceptions are, but also how you address them, because I think you had such a great approach.
Right. So, I was actually thinking about it when I was driving over here, because I was thinking it's not by coincidence that Passover is here next week, Pesach is coming, and when the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt and left Egypt, it was the merit of the Jewish women that took them out of Egypt. And I feel like the perception of an Orthodox Jewish woman is not the right perception. And I think a lot of times when people don't know something, they're uncertain about it. And not necessarily in a negative way, but I think there's just some uncertainty, and so they kind of stay away from it. And for me as a Jewish woman, I really hope every day I lead by example, that a Jewish woman is here to raise her family, if she chooses to raise her family, or to be a mother, in my case, to be a community member, to teach, to educate, and she could do whatever she wants. There is a perception that Orthodox women don't have a lot of choice. And it's it's just not true. And, I think I was sharing with you, having a large family, it was always interesting to me in Birmingham that I would get comments from people that I would see out, a lot of religious Christians be like, oh my gosh, you're having your 8th baby or your 9th baby. I'm from a family of 10, or how amazing that is. And the reaction sometimes from some of the Jewish community was not always the same. And it was always interesting to me. And I know that deep down people were truly always happy for me. But I think there's having a large family was a choice that Yossi and I made that was very important to us. It is a value that we hold very dearly. And so the way we live our life is by choice. Nothing is forced upon us. And I think that's where there's a lot of misconception around that life. And there's a lot of joy in our life, and in the work that goes into it. But yeah.
And what I was really impressed by was that you shared with me that you are always wanting to answer people's questions. Yes. When they do have them. Yes. That seemed important to you.
Very much so. And I know I've told you that, but there's, again, a lot of the misconceptions that people have. I'm always like, please ask me the questions. I want to tell you the answers. I would so much rather you hear the answer from me than assume that you know what the answer is. And again, I really believe that it's just because people don't know, and they're kind of a little bit uncertain.
Which is sort of like everything, right? It's like, yes. When we don't know somebody or know something, then we tend to be hesitant about it. A little unsure. So yes. I think that's great. Well, my last question for you today is, you've spoken to this throughout, but I thought we'd close on you just talking a little bit about, really what your goals are as a Jewish community leader. And again, I think you've hit on this, but you sort of summarized it so beautifully when we spoke before. Like, what is your, what are your primary goals as a leader of this Jewish community?
I would say that my goal is to inspire and educate, especially the Jewish women in our community, the Jewish mothers. That's one of the things I was sharing with you, is that as Jewish mothers, and again, a lot of it is when I talk to our preschool mothers, the importance of educating our children. This is the next generation. This is the generation that's going to take over, and they need to know they need to understand and know the beauty of the Jewish people, and and we have to educate them that way. And what does that look like? And what does it look like to create a Jewish home? What does that really look like? And how important that is? And what does it mean to be a proud Jew, especially in today's day and age, when we live with a lot of anti-Semitism around and a lot of uncertainty, and people are maybe a little afraid of being a proud Jewish person. What does that look like, and what message do we want our children to have? So that is my goal. My goal is to be able to be there to inspire and to educate and to live as an example for our Jewish community as to how we can raise the next generation of Jewish leaders.
That's great, and I think a perfect note to close us on today. So anything else you want to add?
Just thank you for having me.
Thank you all so
Appreciate
much
all
for
our friends
listening.
coming.